December 3, 1941, Corregidor Island, Philippines. Technical Sergeant Elliot Tanner hunched over his homemade radio set inside the damp concrete tunnel, sweat beading on his forehead despite the relative coolness of the underground Malinta tunnel complex. Through his headphones came the faint rhythmic dots and dashes of Japanese military transmissions, unintelligible to most, but increasingly familiar to him. Tanner believed his newly designed antenna system would merely give American forces a modest advantage in monitoring enemy communications. He had no way of knowing that within 72 hours, his unorthodox creation would intercept the final command codes that would launch the Pacific War. A full day before some Japanese field commanders received their own orders. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the remarkable true story of how one man's scientific curiosity and unconventional thinking created an intelligence breakthrough that could have altered the opening days of World War II in the Pacific. If only his superiors had recognized what they were hearing. The monsoon season had brought relentless downpours to the Philippines that autumn of 1941. The American and Filipino forces were on high alert as relations with Japan deteriorated by the day. Lieutenant General Douglas MacArthur had been recalled to active duty earlier that year to command United States Army forces in the Far East, working frantically to prepare the Philippines for potential attack. Military intelligence indicated Japanese naval activity throughout the South China Sea had increased dramatically, but specific intentions remained frustratingly unclear. Among the collection of soldiers, sailors, and Marines stationed on Corregidor was Technical Sergeant Elliot Tanner, a 28-year-old signals specialist with the United States Army Signal Corps. Tanner had joined the Army in 1933 after completing 2 years of electrical engineering studies at Purdue University. The Great Depression had forced him to abandon his formal education, but not his passion for radio technology. In the Signal Corps, Tanner found his calling, quickly distinguishing himself as someone who could not only operate the equipment with exceptional skill, but also modify and improve it. "The Japanese are transmitting something significant," Tanner said to Corporal Miguel Reyes, his assistant and one of the few Filipino signal operators fluent in both English and Japanese. "The volume of traffic has doubled in the last 48 hours. Reyes nodded, his pen moving rapidly across the notebook as he transcribed another burst of Morse code. "Same encryption pattern as yesterday. I recognize some of the carrier wave characteristics, but the message itself is unreadable without the current cipher." "It's not just the volume," Tanner said, adjusting a dial carefully. "It's the pattern. High-priority transmissions repeated at precise intervals. Something's happening." Captain Warren Phillips, Tanner's direct superior, walked into the radio room, bringing with him the smell of cigarettes and coffee. At 36, Phillips was a career military man with little patience for theories and hunches. He wanted facts, evidence, and actionable intelligence. "Any breakthrough with that contraption of yours, Tanner?" Phillips asked, eyeing the modified radio setup with undisguised skepticism. "Sir, we're picking up increased Japanese naval communications. The signal strength suggests major fleet movements," Tanner replied, straightening his posture. "If I could get permission to implement my multiple azimuth discrimination antenna system more fully." "Your MAD system," Phillips interrupted, emphasizing the acronym with a hint of mockery. "The one that requires 400 feet of copper wire we don't have, and manpower we can't spare to string it across the hillside." "The preliminary results are promising, sir," Tanner persisted. "My design can triangulate transmission sources with far greater accuracy than standard equipment, and more importantly, it can boost certain weak signals that might otherwise be lost." Phillips sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Look, Tanner, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but naval intelligence at Pearl Harbor has better equipment and more translators than we do. Our job is to monitor local communications and provide tactical intelligence for the defense of these islands. With respect, sir, I believe we're hearing preparations for something imminent," Tanner said. "The transmission patterns have changed. There's a sense of urgency I haven't detected before." Phillips looked at the stack of transcribed messages, most of which remained undecrypted. "Submit your request for additional materials through proper channels. In the meantime, continue monitoring and reporting as usual." After Phillips left, Reyes looked at Tanner sympathetically. He doesn't understand the technical aspects. Perhaps Commander Fabian would be more receptive. Naval intelligence has been more progressive about new interception techniques. Tanner considered this. Lieutenant Commander Rudolph Fabian ran the cast intercept station for the Navy on Corregidor. While there was institutional rivalry between Army and Navy intelligence operations, Fabian had a reputation for being more open to innovation than many of his counterparts. "Maybe," Tanner said, "but I'm not waiting for approval. I've been saving copper wire from damaged equipment for weeks. Tonight, we're going to expand the antenna array, even if it's smaller than ideal." That evening, under cover of darkness, Tanner and Reyes, along with Privates James Wilson and Robert Tanaka, made their way up the slopes of Malinta Hill. Wilson, a former telephone lineman from Kansas City, had the climbing skills needed to string wire across difficult terrain. Tanaka, a Nisei soldier whose parents had emigrated from Japan, had volunteered to help, despite the suspicion sometimes directed his way. "You're sure this isn't going to get us court-martialed?" Wilson asked as he hammered a support stake into the rocky ground. "I'm calling it maintenance and expansion of existing equipment," Tanner replied, unspooling the precious copper wire. "Technically not a lie." "And when Captain Phillips sees a new antenna array that wasn't there yesterday?" Tanaka asked, holding a flashlight carefully shielded to minimize visibility from the sea. "I'll deal with that tomorrow," Tanner said. "Tonight, we build." Tanner's multiple azimuth discrimination system was based on a principle he had first explored during his university days. Standard direction-finding antennas could determine the approximate origin of a radio transmission, but with limited accuracy. Tanner's innovation was to use multiple antennas arranged in a specific geometric pattern, with the signals combined through a series of filters and amplifiers he had designed himself. The theory was sound, but the execution had been hampered by lack of resources and official support. Tonight's work would bring the system closer to Tanner's original vision, though still far from complete. By 3 in the morning, exhausted but satisfied, the 4 men returned to the tunnel complex. The expanded antenna array was now operational, disguised as much as possible to avoid both enemy observation and official scrutiny. "Get some sleep," Tanner told the others. "I'll take the first monitoring shift with the new setup." Alone in the radio room, Tanner connected his equipment to the new antenna system. The difference was immediately apparent. Signal strength from certain directions increased markedly, while the ability to filter out interference improved the clarity of transmissions. For the next 2 hours, Tanner meticulously logged Japanese communications, noting the increased reception quality. Most messages remained encrypted, but the mere ability to intercept more of them and to better identify their sources represented a significant advancement. At 5:45 in the morning on December 4th, Tanner intercepted a transmission that made him sit bolt upright. The signal was unusually strong, coming from what he estimated to be a powerful transmitter in the Tokyo region. More importantly, it used a different encryption pattern from the routine military traffic he had been monitoring. Tanner quickly transcribed the Morse code, then duplicated the message onto a second sheet. He placed the original in the standard intelligence folder for processing. The copy he took directly to Corporal Reyes's quarters, waking the young Filipino with an urgent shake. "Miguel, I need you to look at this right away," Tanner said, handing over the transcription. Reyes blinked sleep from his eyes and studied the sequence of dots and dashes. "This is high-level Imperial Navy encryption. We don't have the current keys to decode this." "I know, but look at the signal characteristics I've noted. The transmission power, the repeating sequence at the beginning. This isn't routine communication." Reyes studied the notes. "You're right. This has all the markers of what we would call a standby to execute order. But without decryption, we can't be certain of the content." "We need to get this to someone with authority immediately," Tanner said. "I think this could be the execution order for Japanese operations against American territories." "Captain Phillips won't be on duty for another 3 hours," Reyes noted. "Then we go above him. We take this directly to Colonel Constant." Colonel James Constant was the senior Army intelligence officer on Corregidor, responsible for coordinating with both MacArthur's headquarters in Manila and naval intelligence operations. Within 30 minutes, Tanner and Reyes stood at attention in Colonel Constant's office, having convinced the colonel's aide of the urgency of their information. Constant, a tall, thin man with penetrating eyes and a perpetual expression of mild dissatisfaction, reviewed the transmission data with a growing frown. "Let me understand this correctly, Sergeant," Constant said, looking up from the papers. "You've expanded your antenna system without proper authorization, intercepted what you believe to be a high-priority Japanese transmission, but cannot actually decode the message content. And based on this, you've bypassed your immediate superior to request an emergency meeting with me." "Yes, sir," Tanner replied, standing rigidly at attention. "The transmission characteristics strongly suggest this is an action order of the highest priority." "And you base this assessment on what exactly?" "Sir, I've been monitoring Japanese communications for 14 months. This transmission has unique properties consistent with command-level operational orders. The signal strength, the repeated verification sequences, the transmission time, all indicate exceptional importance." Colonel Constant turned to Reyes. "Corporal, as our Japanese language specialist, what's your assessment?" "Sir, while I cannot decrypt the message without the current cipher keys, Sergeant Tanner is correct about the transmission format. It follows the pattern for highest priority Imperial Navy Command communications. Additionally, it was sent repeatedly, which is done only for orders of critical importance." Constant leaned back in his chair, considering. "You realize that naval intelligence at Stationcast has more advanced decryption capabilities. Why bring this directly to me instead of coordinating through proper channels with Commander Fabian?" Tanner hesitated before answering. "Sir, time may be critical. If this is indeed an execution order for operations against American forces, every hour could be vital." "What exactly do you expect me to do with undecrypted intelligence, Sergeant?" Constant asked, his tone sharpening. "Alert General MacArthur that the Japanese might be planning something based on the intuition of a signals sergeant and his unauthorized antenna experiment." Before Tanner could respond, the office door opened and Captain Phillips entered, his face flushed with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. "Colonel, I apologize for the breach of protocol," Phillips said. "I've just learned that Sergeant Tanner approached you directly with unprocessed signals intelligence." "Yes, Captain. Your sergeant has been explaining his theories about Japanese fleet movements," Constant replied dryly. "Sir, with respect," Tanner interjected, "this isn't about fleet movements. I believe we've intercepted the actual execution order for Japanese offensive operations." Phillips looked mortified by Tanner's continued insubordination. "Colonel, I assure you we'll follow proper procedures for analyzing this transmission through standard channels." Colonel Constant studied the three men before him, then made his decision. "Captain, I want this transmission data shared with naval intelligence immediately. If this is as significant as Sergeant Tanner believes, we need Commander Fabian's decryption resources." "Yes, sir," Phillips replied stiffly. "And Captain," Constant added, "while I don't condone Sergeant Tanner's methods, his initiative merits consideration. I want a full assessment of his antenna system and its potential applications. Perhaps there's something valuable in his mad approach after all." "Thank you, sir," Tanner said, relief evident in his voice. "Don't thank me yet, Sergeant," Constant warned. "If this turns out to be routine communication, you'll have some explaining to do about your unauthorized equipment modifications." At the Naval Intelligence Station across the island, Lieutenant Commander Rudolph Fabian reviewed the transmission data with growing concern. His team had intercepted the same transmission, but the signal quality had been poor, making complete transcription difficult. Tanner's version provided the missing components. "The encryption is definitely JN25, Fabian noted, referring to the Japanese Naval Operational Code. "But we don't have the current cipher keys. Pearl Harbor might, but communication delays make immediate decryption problematic." Captain Phillips stood uncomfortably nearby as Tanner explained his antenna system to Fabian's chief signals officer, Lieutenant Morris. "The multiple antenna elements create a phased array," Tanner explained, sketching the design on paper. "By comparing phase differences between elements, we can more accurately determine transmission direction. More importantly, The system can enhance signals from specific directions while filtering out interference. Ingenious in its simplicity, Morris commented. You implemented this with salvaged materials. Mostly, Tanner admitted. The design can be scaled based on available resources. Fabian joined their conversation. Sergeant, your transmission matches ours, but with substantially better signal quality. If you're intercepting with this level of clarity, we need to consider formal integration of your system with our operations. Phillips looked stunned at this development, but quickly regained his composure. Commander, I'm sure we can arrange proper coordination between our services. Good, Fabian replied, because I'm sending this transmission to Pearl Harbor immediately, along with our assessment that it represents a potential action order. I'm also going to recommend heightened alert status for all Pacific commands. Will Pearl Harbor take it seriously without decryption? Tanner asked. Fabian's expression darkened. That's the question, isn't it? Our warnings about Japanese intentions have become something of a broken record in Washington. Without specific intelligence on targets and timing, it's another alert in a long series of alerts. Over the next 48 hours, Tanner's antenna system intercepted a series of additional high-priority transmissions. The volume and pattern of communications strongly suggested preparations for imminent action, but without decryption, the specific details remained elusive. On the morning of December 6th, Tanner intercepted another unusual transmission. This one was broadcast on a lower frequency, typically used for communication with submarines and ships at extreme distances. This is odd, Tanner remarked to Reyes. It's being transmitted with enormous power, almost as if they want to ensure reception across the entire Pacific. Reyes studied the signal characteristics and repeated every 30 minutes. Whatever this is, they're making absolutely certain every Japanese commander receives it. Tanner worked through the night, monitoring the repeated transmissions. By dawn on December 7th, the pattern changed again. New transmissions, shorter and more frequent, began flowing between Japanese naval units. Something's happening, Tanner told Captain Phillips, who had become notably more respectful of Tanner's assessments in recent days. The communication pattern has shifted from preparation to what looks like active operations. Phillips forwarded Tanner's analysis to both Colonel Constant and Commander Fabian. Within hours, the first reports of Japanese attacks on Malaya began arriving through official channels. Then, shortly after noon Philippines time, the news that would change everything. Pearl Harbor had been attacked by Japanese aircraft. The Pacific War had begun. In the chaos that followed, Tanner's earlier interception of what had indeed been the Japanese execution order was temporarily forgotten. But as the initial shock subsided, Commander Fabian sought out Tanner in the crowded command center on Corregidor. Your assessment was correct, Sergeant, Fabian said grimly. What you intercepted on December 4th was almost certainly the final execute order for the Pearl Harbor operation. We've confirmed that many Japanese commanders received their orders only hours before the attack. Somehow, your antenna system picked up the transmission a full day before some of the actual recipients. Tanner felt a hollow sensation in his stomach. If we'd been able to decrypt it. Don't go down that road, Fabian advised. The failure wasn't yours. The intelligence system wasn't prepared to recognize and act on what you found. The following weeks brought the full fury of Japanese attacks against the Philippines. Manila fell on January 2nd, 1942, and American and Filipino forces retreated to the Bataan Peninsula. Through it all, Tanner continued refining his antenna system, adapting it to changing conditions and helping to maintain the fragile communication links between isolated units. By March, the situation on Bataan had become desperate. Food and ammunition were running critically short, and disease was spreading rapidly among the malnourished troops. Military intelligence, including Tanner's radio intercepts, indicated that the Japanese were preparing for a final offensive to crush the remaining resistance. In the damp confines of a makeshift signals bunker, Tanner worked feverishly to maintain his equipment as artillery shells exploded on the slopes above. Captain Phillips, now haggard and 20 pounds lighter than in December, approached with a message form. "New orders, Sergeant," Phillips said, handing over the paper. You're being evacuated to Corregidor tonight. Colonel Constant specifically requested your transfer. Tanner looked up in surprise. Sir, we're still getting valuable intelligence here. I should stay with the unit. This comes directly from General Wainwright, Phillips replied, referring to the commander who had taken over when MacArthur was ordered to Australia. Your expertise is considered too valuable to risk capture. That night, Tanner was transported across the narrow strait to Corregidor, along with several other specialists and a handful of wounded soldiers. As the small boat pulled away from the Bataan shore, Tanner watched artillery flashes illuminate the peninsula that had been his home for months. He felt a profound sense of guilt at leaving comrades behind. On Corregidor, Colonel Constant wasted no time putting Tanner to work. We're establishing a new signals intelligence unit in Malinta Tunnel, Constant explained. Your antenna design is being implemented on a larger scale to maintain our monitoring capabilities as long as possible. What about Corporal Reyes and the others? Tanner asked. Constant's expression tightened. They remain on Bataan for now. If evacuation becomes possible, they're on the priority list. Over the next month, Tanner supervised the installation of an expanded version of his MAD antenna system, incorporating refinements based on his combat experience. Working alongside Navy personnel from Station Cast, he developed new techniques for filtering the increasing Japanese radio traffic. On April 9th, Bataan fell to the Japanese after a final offensive overwhelmed the starving American and Filipino defenders. Thousands of prisoners began the infamous Bataan Death March, including many of Tanner's former comrades. Corporal Reyes, Captain Phillips, and countless others faced the brutal 80-mile forced march to Camp O'Donnell, during which thousands would die from exhaustion, disease, and Japanese atrocities. Tanner learned of Bataan's fall through the very equipment he had designed to provide advance warning. The bitter irony was not lost on him as he intercepted Japanese communications celebrating their victory. We should have known, Tanner said bitterly to Lieutenant Morris as they monitored transmissions from the Malinta Tunnel complex. We had the execution order in our hands before the war even started, and we couldn't do anything with it. Intelligence is only valuable if it can be understood and acted upon, Morris replied. Your system worked. The larger intelligence apparatus didn't. Corregidor held out for another month under increasingly heavy bombardment. Tanner's antenna system, repeatedly damaged and rebuilt, continued providing critical information about Japanese movements and intentions. This intelligence helped the defenders resist far longer than Japanese commanders had anticipated, tying down significant enemy forces that might otherwise have been deployed elsewhere. On May 5, 1942, the final Japanese assault on Corregidor began with a massive amphibious landing. By this point, Tanner had been ordered to prepare essential equipment for destruction. Standing in the communications center with Colonel Constant, he received the orders he had been dreading. It's time, Sergeant, Constant said, his voice steady despite the circumstances. Implement the destruct protocol for all cryptographic and signals intelligence equipment. Yes, sir, Tanner replied. He hesitated, then asked, what about my research notes on the antenna design? Constant considered this. Can you memorize the essential elements? I've been living with the design for months, sir. It's all up here. Tanner tapped his temple. Then destroy the documentation. Nothing of intelligence value can fall into enemy hands. As Tanner methodically destroyed his equipment and documentation, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. What had begun as a technical experiment had evolved into a system that had intercepted the very orders launching the Pacific War. Yet that remarkable achievement had ultimately changed nothing about the course of the conflict. The following day, May 6, 1942, Corregidor surrendered to Japanese forces. Tanner, along with approximately 11,000 other American and Filipino troops, became prisoners of war. Before his capture, he managed to bury a small waterproof container containing the core schematics of his antenna design in a location he carefully memorized. Tanner spent the remainder of the war in Japanese prison camps, first at Bilibid Prison in Manila, then at Cabanatuan. Despite severe malnutrition and disease that claimed many of his fellow prisoners, he survived by applying the same methodical problem-solving approach that had characterized his work as a signals specialist. In Cabanatuan camp, Tanner encountered a familiar face, Corporal Miguel Reyes, who had somehow survived the death march and subsequent imprisonment. Reyes had lost nearly 40 pounds from his already slight frame, but his spirit remained unbroken. "I thought you were dead," Tanner said, when they managed a moment of private conversation away from guards. "Nearly was, several times," Reyes replied, "but I kept thinking about all those transmissions we intercepted. I wanted to live long enough to see if we were right about what they meant." "We were right," Tanner said grimly. "Not that it made any difference." "It might yet," Reyes said, "if we survive to share what we learned." In January 1945, as American forces returned to the Philippines, Tanner and Reyes were among thousands of prisoners hastily transported to Japan aboard the infamous Hell ships, overcrowded cargo vessels where prisoners died by the hundreds from suffocation, dehydration, and Allied bombing. Their ship, the Oryoku Maru, was attacked by American aircraft unaware it carried Allied prisoners. Hundreds died, but Tanner and Reyes were among the survivors transferred to another vessel. After liberation in September 1945, Tanner returned to the United States, a decorated war hero, but a physically broken man, weighing just 110 pounds. During his recovery at Letterman General Hospital in San Francisco, he was approached by representatives from the newly established Army Security Agency, the predecessor to the National Security Agency. "Your work on Corregidor has come to our attention, Sergeant Tanner," Colonel William Hayes explained during their first meeting, "particularly your multiple azimuth discrimination antenna system." "How did you learn about that?" Tanner asked, surprised that anyone remembered his work after the fall of the Philippines. "Commander Fabian included detailed reports on your system in the materials evacuated before Corregidor fell. Additionally, Lieutenant Morris survived the war and has been quite vocal about the effectiveness of your design." Hayes placed a folder on Tanner's bed. "We'd like to offer you a position with the agency, developing next-generation signals intelligence systems based on your work." "The war's over," Tanner said. "Who are we listening to now?" Hayes's expression remained neutral. "The world is realigning, Sergeant. New potential adversaries are emerging. Your expertise would be invaluable." After his medical discharge from the Army, Tanner accepted the offer. In 1946, he returned to the Philippines with a small team to recover the schematics he had hidden on Corregidor. Remarkably, the waterproof container remained intact, protected from the elements and overlooked during Japanese occupation. With those original designs and his extensive wartime experience, Tanner helped develop a new generation of signals intelligence systems that would form the backbone of American electronic intelligence gathering during the early Cold War. His MAD antenna concept evolved into sophisticated direction-finding arrays deployed globally to monitor Soviet bloc communications. In 1953, Tanner attended a ceremony at the Pentagon where he received the Legion of Merit for his wartime contributions to signals intelligence. The citation, carefully worded to avoid revealing classified details, recognized his exceptional technical innovation under combat conditions. After the ceremony, an elderly gentleman in a civilian suit approached Tanner. It took a moment before Tanner recognized Colonel Constant, now retired and considerably grayer. "I've followed your career with interest, Tanner," Constant said, shaking his hand firmly. "Your work has had far greater impact than either of us could have imagined back on Corregidor." "Thank you, sir," Tanner replied, "though I often wonder what might have happened if we'd been able to decrypt that execution order in 41. Constant nodded thoughtfully. "That question has haunted many of us. But remember, it wasn't your antenna that failed us. You gave us the intelligence. The system wasn't prepared to understand its significance or act upon it with sufficient urgency." "A lesson learned at tremendous cost," Tanner observed. "Indeed," Constant agreed, "but one that transformed how we approach signals intelligence. The agencies we've built since the war are designed specifically to avoid repeating that failure." In later years, Tanner would occasionally lecture at the Army Signal School, though much of his work remained classified. To students who knew nothing of his experiences in the Philippines, he emphasized one lesson above all others. Technical capabilities are only as valuable as the human systems that interpret and act upon the intelligence they provide. Tanner retired in 1972 after a distinguished career spanning 3 decades. He settled in Maryland, not far from the NSA headquarters at Fort Meade, where many of his designs continued to influence American signals intelligence capabilities. He rarely spoke about his wartime experiences, even as classified documents began to be declassified and the full story of pre-war intelligence failures came to light. In 1991, nearly 50 years after the fall of Corregidor, Tanner received an unexpected visitor at his home. Miguel Reyes, now in his 70s but still standing straight and dignified, had tracked down his old comrade after decades of separation. "I always wondered what happened to you after the war," Tanner said as they sat in his living room, surrounded by photos of children and grandchildren. Reyes smiled. "I returned to the Philippines, joined their signal corps, eventually retired as a colonel. But I never forgot our work together, especially that transmission we intercepted before Pearl Harbor. The one that could have changed everything," Tanner mused. "Perhaps," Reyes said, "or perhaps not. Even if we had decrypted it, would anyone have acted decisively enough to make a difference?" Tanner considered this. "We'll never know. But what we learned from that failure helped shape intelligence operations for generations." "That's the real legacy of your mad antenna," Reyes observed. "Not just the technology itself, but the recognition that technical solutions must be paired with organizational systems capable of understanding and acting on what they reveal." As the 2 old soldiers reminisced long into the evening, they reflected on how their experiences on Corregidor had rippled through history in ways they could never have anticipated. Tanner's improvised antenna design, created from salvaged copper wire and implemented against official skepticism, had evolved into sophisticated signals intelligence systems deployed worldwide. The intercept that had come too early to prevent disaster had nevertheless helped shape the intelligence community that emerged from the war. In 2001, following Tanner's death at the age of 88, a small museum exhibition at the National Cryptologic Museum finally made public the full story of the MAD antenna system and its role in intercepting the Pearl Harbor execution order. Visitors could see a reconstruction of Tanner's original design, alongside the modern systems it had influenced. The exhibition included a quote from Tanner's final interview, given shortly before his death. "Intelligence failures are rarely about not having the information. They're about not recognizing the significance of what you already have. On Corregidor, we heard the future approaching, but couldn't translate what we were hearing into action. The greatest lesson is that technology alone is never enough. Human judgment, institutional courage, and organizational readiness are equally essential elements of effective intelligence. Today, the principles Tanner pioneered continue to influence modern signals intelligence operations. Direction-finding antenna arrays, based on his multiple azimuth discrimination concept, remain fundamental components of electronic intelligence gathering worldwide. Yet the most enduring aspect of Tanner's legacy is not technological but organizational. The recognition that advanced collection systems must be matched with analytical frameworks capable of transforming raw data into actionable intelligence. The story of how one resourceful sergeant's unauthorized antenna design intercepted the orders launching the Pacific War stands as both a testament to individual ingenuity and a cautionary tale about the challenges of intelligence in a complex world. Tanner's innovation came at exactly the right time, yet the system it served was not ready to capitalize on its potential. That painful paradox helped reshape American intelligence capabilities for generations to come. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.